Hello everyone. Today I thought I would make a bit of a longer kind of video, and it's related to a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is character design and concept art. So I'm thinking that this could be sort of like the start of a series as I design maybe characters, props, or even environments for this new world and story that I've had in my mind for a while, and there's no time like the present to start getting ahead on your project, so here we go. This world specifically, I've decided to title Brassbound. It takes place in a light steampunk fantasy world where channeling spirits and their magical energy through runes is a commonplace practice. These runes are used to power mechanical automatons that help with everyday life, from labor to infrastructure and pretty much everything in between. But of course, not everything here is quite as utopian as it seems. Spirits aren't always willing to be bound to these machines, and the general public is completely unaware that this ethical line is being crossed. One of the very few people who is actually aware, and is also in charge of overseeing this, is the ruler of this kingdom, and the character I'll be designing today, Queen Annalise III. Royalty is a huge source of influence within any kingdom, so designing the queen first felt like the best way to establish a visual and thematic foundation for the rest of the world. Everything else I design later will naturally branch out from her. The world itself is loosely inspired by the Victorian era, so I gathered a range of references to get a feel for the silhouettes, the layering, and overall aesthetic that I wanted to lean into. For Annalise specifically, I wanted to focus on strong, readable shape language, a mostly red color palette, and intricate detailing to emphasize her high status. And also, if you pay attention to these references that I've gathered here, you can see that in most of the dresses, layering plays a big role in how the outfit is built, so I'm keeping that in mind moving forward with the design as well. Now, with all the setup done, let's get into the actual art. I started off with some rough face concept sketches. Faces are a really important element for establishing a character's overall vibe and disposition, so I gathered a range of different ages and features to see what would best fit Annalise. From these initial explorations, I ended up choosing the first option since it felt reminiscent of Victorian-era portrait paintings. Smaller lips, a lower nose, and thinner eyebrows helped sell that influence quite nicely, I think. Annalise herself is meant to be a cold and calculating queen, respected and admired for her logical, efficient style of ruling. She was crowned at a young age following the untimely death of her parents, circumstances that were quietly buried and never disclosed to the public. However, under her rule, the kingdom experienced the fastest development of automaton and runemancy it had ever seen. These advancements were so popular that people didn't question how suddenly the shift in leadership actually occurred. They were simply happy with the innovation that their new queen brought with her. And now, going back to the design, I wanted to keep her shape language sharp and recognizable, but not overly or obviously evil. Eyes are also a recurring motif I plan to use throughout this project, especially since Annalise's motivations are closely tied to surveillance and control. But that's something I'll dive deeper if I make any future videos discussing more about this world and its characters. I ultimately went with the horned hairstyle design. I think it creates a strong and interesting silhouette, and while the hairstyle itself isn't aggressive, the horns subtly hint at her true nature beneath the surface. Next up, the outfit. Victorian dresses are known for their broad shoulder shapes, puffed hips, and layered skirts. Looking back at my references, most dresses from the time are fairly modest, with very little skin showing. Though we can also see that the royal fashion does seem to push that boundary slightly, often exposing more of the shoulders and the arms. For Annalise, I wanted to keep her more covered. She's not an open person, and as we've already established, she has a lot to hide, so a more closed-off design felt fitting. I am exploring several dress shapes and levels of intricacy, but I think in the end, design number 4 felt like the strongest option. It carries a very interesting shape language, keeping her covered, but also kind of calling back to the more open nature of other period-accurate royal dresses. So I like this one the best, and I will be taking this design forward into color exploration. So now that we have the face and outfit decided upon, it's time to move on to color. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I want her to have a mostly red color scheme. It's bold, commanding, and I think it suits her personality very well. That said, when you're designing characters, or anything really, it's always worth experimenting. Who knows, you might surprise yourself with an idea that you didn't originally have. I created a more detailed front-facing version of the dress and started with the red color scheme. Then I duplicated it and used a simple trick available in most art programs, where you adjust the hue or saturation or the color curves. This is often found, for example, in Procreate. When you click the little magic wand tool at the top, it allows you to shift the hue and very easily change the color schemes of your piece. In the end, however, I still felt that the red worked best, but exploring other options is always worth it, because again, you never know. With all that done, it's time to move on to creating the final character turnaround sheet. These are incredibly helpful for maintaining consistency whenever you redraw a character later on. Having a clear front, side, and back view means you're never guessing where things go or how they're supposed to look in the future. During this stage, I made one final design tweak, replacing the spiked elements around her hips with a simpler draped cloth. It reads more clearly and feels more practical, and this is much easier to replicate in future illustrations as well. The spikes just didn't feel like something Annalise would tolerate. They were messy and impractical, which goes completely against her personality. And now that everything else is finished, I am creating a more cinematic full body illustration of our queen. This acts as a sort of front page for her chapter in this project, so I gave her a bold background and pushed the rendering a bit further for this one. I'm keeping her pose intentionally rigid and static. These kinds of dresses wouldn't allow for much mobility anyway, and her stiffness reflects her serious, controlled nature. For your own characters, this is where you can really experiment with posing. The turnaround handles accuracy, while this piece is all about the personality. I chose a blue background here since it contrasts nicely with the red and helps her stand out. Finally, I created a more cinematic bust illustration. Here she's looking downward at something off screen, a pose that to me perfectly captures her personality. She is above everybody else, and she knows it. The strong lighting on one side of her face adds visual interest while hinting at something weird and unseen in the background, something she is very much aware of and also very much does not want us to know about. And with that, we have reached the end of what I'm hoping will be the first of many character design videos for this project called Brassbound. Next up, I'll be designing some of the automatons since they play just as big a role in this world as the queen herself. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing my process, and if you liked this video enough, maybe you'll stick around for the next one. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!